If you grew up during the 90s, it's pretty much guaranteed that you spent a significant time browsing the shelves at Blockbuster. It was the ultimate method of watching movies comfortably at home. All you had to do was just drive over to one of their thousands of locations, pick out a couple of movies and some snacks, and head home with a bag full of VHS tapes for a night of movies. But with the rise of the internet and the dozens of streaming services that arose in the last decade, it's no wonder that Blockbuster inevitably closed their doors, fading into the non-stopping tides of time itself. This often happens when big franchises close down. Blockbuster left behind several buildings, not bothering to properly close them down. Instead, some of the shops were just abandoned, turning them into ideal places for urban explorers like myself. Researching and visiting old abandoned buildings was one of my favorite pastimes as I grew up, and though I wasn't particularly brave, I frequently visited locked-down places, accompanied only by my best friend, Eric. Together, we visited abandoned asylums, hospitals, malls, houses, you name it. And though it had always been exciting and scary, we'd never been in any true danger. That was until last year, when we decided to visit a recently discovered Blockbuster, situated in the middle of nowhere. The peculiar location actually made strategic sense when thinking about business. We lived in a small town where the vast majority of the population traveled to a bigger city, all using the same highway to get to and from work. So on the way home, plenty of people stopped by the Blockbuster to find their entertainment for the evening. Sadly, the place was rendered obsolete, and due to road construction, the place had been pushed back away from civilization. It was perfect. We planned the adventure for a Saturday evening. A lot of these places, though seemingly abandoned, had security guards and cameras, which could leave us with hefty fines if we ignored the keep out signs. But as we arrived just before midnight, we knew for sure that no one had set foot in there in years. There were no fences blocking the building off, no lights, no power lines, no cameras. It was dead, just a building with a half-decaying sign reading, Blockbuster. "Told you it would be awesome," Eric said gleefully as we approached the place. He'd already scouted it out, but he hadn't set foot inside. That was a privilege he had saved for a time we could do it together. He had a knack for finding these places, as if he had some sort of sixth sense allowing him to sniff abandoned buildings out. The door was locked, but being mostly rotten and covered in glass, we could practically crawl through one of the holes to get inside. A rush of adrenaline surged through my body as I took my first step inside. The feeling of visiting a forgotten place so full of history is mesmerizing. That mixed with a feeling of heavy nostalgia for my own childhood made me almost emotional. "Holy shit!" I heard Eric call out as he walked ahead of me. "What is it?" I asked, but as I placed myself beside him, I immediately realized what had excited him so much. There were rows upon rows of shelves, and each and every one of them was stocked to the brink with old VHS tapes. The place hadn't been just abandoned, but everything inside had been left behind as well. In the back there were more shelves filled with snacks that had all expired years ago. And though everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, the items seemed weirdly well preserved. I went from shelf to shelf, studying the movies, but it wasn't until I brushed the dust away before a disappointing realization hit me, that all the covers were blank. Of course, it could have been washed away by time, meaning the original pictures were just faded, but it didn't feel right. I took some of the VHS tapes out from their respective boxes to look for titles. "This is weird," I said out loud. "What is?" Eric asked. I showed him the tape. Instead of a printed title displaying the name of the movie, all it had was a letter and a number, crudely handwritten onto the spine of the tape. D1024, it read. "Should we check it out?" Eric asked. "How?" "There must be an old VHS player laying around here somewhere. I mean, they left everything else behind, right?" he explained. "Well, even if we found one, they cut power ages ago." "Yeah, but we'll take it home with us. It's not like they'll miss it." So we went on a search for a VHS player. Though the Blockbuster had clearly closed down before streaming services took over, most of the shelves were marked with signs reading DVD player, but they were empty. My theory was that they'd taken the DVDs and modern products with them as they closed down, leaving the outdated equipment behind. "Found one!" I heard Eric yell from somewhere behind the counter. He'd found a door leading into one of the offices, which had a table, a television, and a VHS player already connected. The cables were all zip-tied along their paths, making it hard to remove without a knife or scissors. "You didn't bring anything sharp?" I asked. "No, but maybe a lighter would work." "Just be careful not to melt the cable," I said. "Don't worry, I got the... Before Eric could finish that sentence, a loud static buzz filled the room alongside a bright light emerging from the television. We stumbled back in shock, staring at the TV in disbelief. Despite the power being cut off, it had seemingly come to life all on its own. "What did you do?" I asked. "Nothing, it just turned on." "How was that even possible?" As the adrenaline wore off, I tried to more logically assess the situation. I tried the various light switches, in addition to attempting to turn on anything in the vicinity, but apart from the player, nothing would come to life. "It's probably connected to a separate circuit or something. I don't know. I know nothing about these things," Eric said. "It's weird. Kind of creepy. Still, now that we have a functioning player, should we check out some of the tapes?" he asked. A part of me just wanted to turn around and leave the building. My lizard brain was on high alert, but logically, there couldn't be anything dangerous about an old TV. So I ignored my gut instinct and handed Eric one of the tapes. "Here we go," he said, still excited. The static image faded ever so slightly, partially getting replaced by a blurry image. We were expecting some kind of logo, followed by a movie, but instead the silhouette just lingered there in the middle of the screen. We stared at it for a few moments, trying to figure out just what we were looking at. "Is that a man?" I asked. "I think so, but he's just standing there," Eric said. "No, look at his head," I said as I pointed out the mild rocking movement. He seemed to be shaking his head, each movement a tiny snap, too fast and jerky for any real human to reproduce, almost as if each move was breaking his neck. Then a picture appeared on screen. It only stayed there for a split second, immediately reverting back to the staticky man. "Did you see that?" Eric asked. "Yeah, it's a picture of a room, I think. You saw it too?" "Sort of. I mean, I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it somehow felt familiar." Then another picture flashed on my screen. "Isn't that..." I began. "It's my bedroom," Eric said in shock. That time it lingered half a second, giving us a clear view. By the next time the screen flashed, we even noticed Eric himself sitting on the bed, getting ready for our trip. "It was filmed this morning." But the film didn't end there. The image turned back to static, with the barely visible man hidden among the snow. He seemed to be just a bit closer then, still jerking his head in unnatural ways. "Let's just leave," I suggest. "No, I need to see this," Eric said, still in shock. Then another scene appeared on the screen, an empty road we both instantly recognized. It was the old turnoff that led to this place. A car came into view, with Eric driving it. The footage was taken from the street, as if someone had filmed it personally with shaky hands. But the area was rid of any plant life, completely flat. Had a person been standing there, we'd easily have seen them. Then a second of static with the man standing even closer, before the tape showed a view from inside the Blockbuster looking out. We could see Eric park his car and look over the area as he waited for me. "Oh, fuck. He's here," Eric said. We let the tape keep playing as we looked around the room. Once we ensured the building was empty, we retreated to the office and shut the door. The film we were met with froze us both in place. It was the two of us standing in the office, watching the tape real time, and the footage was taken from directly behind us. We spun around in fear, and I let out a relieved sigh when I realized there was nothing there. But as I turned to Eric, I noticed the look of utter horror plastered upon his face. He was staring straight ahead, as if transfixed by something. "What's wrong?" I asked. Don't let him get me," he let out meekly. "Who?" But Eric never got a chance to respond as he suddenly threw his arms up in a defensive pose. Only a split second later, I could see large gashes appear on his forearms before his flesh was torn from bone. He fell to the ground and screamed in agony as more and more of his muscle, fat, and skin got stripped away. I stood frozen by his side, not able to see the invisible attacker. Then I did something I will regret to the day I die. I started to run. I opened the door, giving a final glimpse behind me to see the truth of what was happening. That would be the only time I got a glimpse of the monster, as a picture on the TV screen, a grotesque, massive creature hunched over, slashing at Eric with overly long arms looking more akin to knives than actual limbs. Even had I tried, there was nothing I could do to help him. I ran out from the store, got in my car, and drove away as I called the police. But being distracted by the phone and adrenaline pumping through my veins, I swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch. As the airbag emerged and hit me in the face, the world just turned black around me. It wouldn't be until I heard the sirens. Then I awoke from my slumber. As the paramedics pulled me out of the car, I kept repeating Eric's name, telling them to help him. The police went to check out the location. but all they could find was an old, abandoned Blockbuster with broken shelves, rid of all merchandise. The office was little more than a dust-covered room with a plain table and nothing more. The tapes, the VHS player, it was all gone. Even Eric's body was missing, leaving no trace of his existence behind. I spent some time in a psychiatric institution after that. Eric was listed as missing, and I was put on the list of suspects for a while. But due to the lack of evidence, I was quickly cleared. No one believes what happened that day, but I saw it, and I saw hundreds of other tapes. Eric was just the first of many victims, with the rest just waiting to find their tapes. Maybe mine is hidden somewhere inside as well. My blood chilled as I came downstairs for breakfast on a Saturday morning and heard the news. A reporter was following the story of an escaped convict, a convict by the name of Barry Marshall. But in the public mind, he was better known by his nickname, Big Red. His string of serial murders had come to be known as the Big Red Killings. The reason for the name was twofold. The term big came from the fact that Barry Marshall was a very large man, but it also referred to the location of the murders, the Big Apple, New York City. The word red referred to both his style of killing and his preferred victims. Every one of his victims had been found strung from their feet with slits in their throats. This allowed for the most amount of blood possible to spew out onto the ground below. He drained them like animals to be butchered. As for his preferred victims, he seemed to exclusively target women with red hair. I was more familiar with his motives, his actions, his desires than anyone else. 3 years prior, I had been the detective who had finally caught him. It was my collected evidence that brought 8 life sentences down on Barry Marshall for his 8 murders. And there, in my living room, on an ordinary Saturday, some stranger was telling me that this man had escaped. My wife, who had been pouring pancake batter into a pan, turned to me with a confused expression. And behind the confusion was a shaking terror. I reached for my phone when it started ringing. I answered. Before I even said anything, the frantic voice of my boss said, "Todd, I'm sorry you've heard already. I don't know what happened, but why the hell did I have to find out from a news station that the man I put away for 8 lifetimes is now on the loose?" I demanded, with a mix of rage and fear. "Todd, I'm so sorry. We're trying to figure that out on our end. No one knows what's going on right now. We thought it was a false report at first, but, well, he really is gone. We're sending protection to your house right now. Just a precautionary measure, of course. But until we find him, you and your family should go somewhere safe." I wanted to yell, but I knew it wouldn't help anything. "That's fine. Thanks, Hank," I said without emotion and hung up. I tossed my phone onto the lounge chair by the window and turned to my wife. The rest of the day went by in a blur. 2 officers arrived and explained the situation. We would be temporarily moving to a hotel room, since we still lived in the same house we had lived in when I had sent Big Red to the state penitentiary. He might have remembered where we lived. The 2 officers would then remain with us until Big Red was found and returned to his cell. The precaution and the fear all stemmed from the final words uttered by Barry Marshall as he was ushered out of the courtroom. He looked right at me and said, "When I get out, they're gonna have to call me Big Blondie." And he laughed. Many were confused by this remark, but his statement was clear to me. It was a direct threat on my wife and daughter, who both had blonde hair. The implication being that he would depart from his ordinary list of victims just to seek revenge on me. It took everything I had to remain calm for my wife and daughter. Fortunately, my 5-year-old was too young to understand the situation and be afraid. As we tossed and turned in our hotel bed that night, I realized that in the panic, I had forgotten my phone. I needed to feel some level of control and normalcy, so I got out of bed and headed for my car. I was stopped by one of our guards, and he told me that there was no chance he would let me go back to my home that night. However, he agreed to go and recover my phone for me. Reluctantly, I returned to bed. I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the officer informed me that he had not found my phone, but more importantly, there had been a break-in at my home. The window had been shattered, but nothing inside seemed to be disturbed. He warned me not to jump to any conclusions, but I already knew that it had to be Big Red. I rummaged through the bag I had brought to the hotel room. A sigh of relief escaped my lips when I found that I had at least brought my work phone. I unlocked it. The phone was connected to my personal phone, and I opened the Find My Phone app. A location popped up. I stared. I hadn't expected it to work, but there it was. I don't know why Big Red had stolen my phone, but now we could head straight for him. I called my boss. He answered. "Hey Todd, good to hear from you. How did the relocation go? I hope that..." "Hank," I interrupted. "I have him. I know where he is." "You... what?" "Big Red. He broke into my home and stole my phone. I don't know why, but I am tracking his location right now from my work phone." Todd, we don't even know for sure that he's the one who broke into your house. You're not really going to pass this lead up, are you?" I asked, my anger steadily rising. "No, of course not. I'll head to the location right away. I just don't want you..." "I'm coming with you." "No, Todd, absolutely not. I know him better than anyone, Hank. Please. He's threatening my family. I have to do this. I won't do anything stupid, but I have to come." After a bit more back and forth, Hank finally agreed to let me come with him and a small team of officers who would search the location. They picked me up at the hotel, and I assured my family that I would be safe as I said goodbye. We tracked the location of my phone to an old warehouse, but as we neared, the location suddenly disappeared. My personal phone had stopped transmitting its location. I began to sweat for fear that Big Red would get away. We reached the warehouse, and the team of officers kicked the door in. I followed shortly after with Hank. The warehouse was completely empty, except for the horror in the middle of the room. Dangling from the ceiling was a woman. She was hanging from her feet. Her neck was slit. A massive puddle of blood pooled beneath her head. The red blood matched her red hair. A bit behind the puddle was a message crudely written in blood. The message said, "Still red, for now. But who's next, Todd?" My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure if I was angry or terrified, but I knew what the message meant, and I had been right. The message was a promise that he would kill again, and this time, he might target my wife and daughter. Big Red had stolen my phone, and he was using it to toy with me. He had led me to his victim, but made sure that he would be gone by the time I arrived. Hank called in an investigation team to comb the warehouse and surrounding area for any evidence that might lead to Big Red. "Go back to your family, Todd," Hank said. "I'm sorry you had to see this. I don't want you anywhere near this case anymore." "But the location," I blurted. "We can track him. I can help you find him." "I linked it to my phone," Hank said. "I'll keep checking to see if a location pops up, but I doubt we'll catch him that way. We need to get ahead of him. He's too smart to give up his location on accident. If we follow it, we'll probably just barely miss him like we did this time." "But I need to come with you. I need to catch him, Hank. No," Hank said sternly. "You need to go back to your family, because your family needs you. Please, Todd, don't make this difficult." I turned back to the upside-down woman in the middle of the large room. Dried blood completely covered her face. It curved around her lips and into her gaping mouth, which was frozen in a scream of terror. I couldn't help but imagine my wife's face, my daughter's face, frozen with that same expression, covered in that same blood. I nodded at Hank. "Okay, I'll go back." Hank squeezed my shoulder. "We'll get him, Todd, I promise." I forced a smile and headed back to a patrol car that returned me to the hotel that had become a prison to my family and I. Big Red's sadistic freedom was imprisoning us. We wouldn't be free until he wasn't. Back at the hotel, I embraced my wife and daughter tightly. My wife couldn't hold back anymore, and she began to sob. This frightened our daughter and caused her to sob as well. I continued to hold them until their tears stopped. Eventually, they found a bit of distraction by watching a game show on the hotel television. But I was checking my work phone, opening and closing the Find My iPhone app repeatedly. I eyed my bag. Inside was a gun. Not the gun I used at work. Hank had not let me keep that. In my bag was a personal weapon, and the second I saw a location appear on my work phone, I would go and do what I needed to do to protect my family. But things didn't go the way I had expected. In fact, things didn't go the way anyone had expected. That night, a location appeared on my phone. It revealed that my personal phone was just outside our hotel room. Big Red was there. I cursed myself for being so stupid. I had been tracking my personal phone, but Big Red had been tracking my work phone. He knew exactly where we were. I jumped from the bed and reached into my bag when a gunshot rang into the night. I opened the hotel room door. It was over. Both guards had their guns drawn. A small wisp of smoke rose from one of the barrels. In the middle of the hotel courtyard was Big Red. He was flat on his back, a hole in the center of his forehead. In his left hand, he held a knife. In his right hand, he clutched my phone. Blood poured out the back of his head and pooled around him, like it had for all his victims. I stared. I should have felt relieved. It was all over. Barry Marshall was dead. but a dreadful array of confused thoughts flooded my mind. Why had he come here like this? He had basically given himself up. He was a smart man who had avoided capture for years. He had escaped a maximum security prison. He had rushed the hotel courtyard to hurt my family, but he must have known he would be shot down. He must have known that there was no hope of reaching us. His dead face bore a hideous, nightmarish smile. I suddenly understood. He was smiling because he had won. I wasn't free now that he was dead. I was imprisoned in my own shame and failure. He had brutally murdered a woman just to get back at me. My name had been written with her blood, and he had known where my family was hiding due to my own stupidity. He had been in complete control, and he wanted me to know that. He wanted me to know that there was no freedom for me, even though he was dead. I thought I could hear laughter emanating from the smiling corpse, and that laughter would follow me for the rest of my life. I moved into the neon glow emanating from the sign that read Zlaya Mysh, the angry mouse. The sign hummed like a beehive ready to burst and release a swarm of inconsolable wrath. Zlaya Mysh was a popular, albeit seedy, nightclub on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. It was not the type of club you would go to on a date or a casual night out. It was a pulsating beast made of drugs and sex with something sinister at its heart. I took one final drag on my cigarette to calm my nerves, and then tossed the fading ember to the ground and stomped it out under the heel of my boot. My hand rested on the cool metal of my Makarov pistol. They would take it from me before I met with him. I knew that. But I hoped the removal of the weapon would be enough to satisfy them, and they wouldn't search me further. Alexei, the gruff bouncer, stood in front of the entrance to the club. He smiled knowingly as I approached him. "Sergey," he said with a false kindness. "Dobro pozholovat. Good to see you." "Move aside," I said. "Ah, yes," Alexei said. "Eager to see the boss, huh? I know he is eager to see you too. Not happy with you. Last guy he was unhappy with didn't end up looking too good." I remained silent. "How'd you screw up such a simple job anyway? One woman and her kid were too much of a fight for you, eh? I could have done it easily. Just pop up, that's all it takes." Fury started to rise in me. How could he make light of such a thing? How could he be so okay with what the boss had asked me to do? "You sicken me," I said through bare teeth. "And yet," Alexei said, "here you are, same as me. We aren't the same, not at all. You work for him for money. That's all you care about." "Oh? And what do you work for, friend?" "You know exactly what. Boss has something of yours, yeah? Something you want back, something you want to protect. The way I see it, he has something I want too. Doesn't matter what that something is. We both work for him to get something we want. That makes us the same. Get it?" I didn't want to argue with him, so I shouldered past him into the nightclub. As I walked past, Alexei whispered a sinister "Do svidaniya" at me. Inside the club, I was immediately assaulted with a deafening sound and a disorienting array of lights. The club was structured with a low, arched ceiling, which gave it the feeling of being inside a tunnel. Along the ceiling were rows of black lights that stretched from the front of the club, where the DJ was, to the back of the club, where the door I was heading to was. Strobe lights flashed, synchronized to the throbbing beat of the music. The entire room was a mosh pit, everyone packed tightly together, jumping up and down to the music. Humidity arose from the sweating bodies, and it filled me with nausea. Along the sides were couples grinding on each other, their naked flesh gyrating like some inhuman monstrosity. I pushed past the swarm of bodies and made my way to the back of the room. Two large men stood on either side of the door. "Boss is waiting for you," one of them said. I motioned for the handle of the door, but a large hand pushed against me. "Your gun," the man said. I stared at him for a moment, feigning defiance, then reached to the holster around my chest and handed my pistol over. He stared at me for a moment. I stared right back, trying desperately not to twitch with anxiety. He nodded to the door, then returned his gaze directly ahead of himself, as if I had never even been there. I grabbed the handle and pulled the door open. Inside, there were two men. Lev, our boss, sat behind a table. He held a cigar, and thin wisps of smoke rose toward the ceiling of the small room. Beside Lev was Igor, an impossibly large man with the face of an ox. He was more intimidating than all of the club's bouncers and guards put together. The weight of his stare crushed me. Lev stood up and flashed a bright smile. "Ah, Sergey," he said. "Welcome, welcome." He walked up to me and gave me a tight hug. "Come sit with me," he said, and returned to his chair. I sat in the chair across from him. Igor stared into me and let out a boar's grunt. "Sergey, how are you?" "I'm doing well, thanks," I said.
You look a little pale. I haven't been working you too hard, have I?
He chuckled. I said nothing but gave a polite smile.
Here,
Lev said, pulling out a bottle of vodka and 2 crystal glasses from his desk drawer.
drink with me, Sergey. Let's talk.
He poured a small amount into each of the glasses and handed one to me.
Don't shoot this,
He said.
Shit vodka is for shooting, but this is the good stuff. Only the best for my friend. We are friends, no?
I didn't know what to say, so I politely smiled again. We both sipped the vodka.
Well,
Lev continued.
I think you think we are friends. You treat me like a friend, like this is a give and take. Some jobs I give you, and you take them. Some jobs I give you, and you give them right back.
His friendly demeanor darkened, and he glared at me.
Like I tell you a woman and her daughter are a witness to one of my business transactions. I tell you they need to bite the bullet. I give you the bullet they will bite. But then I find out they are alive and well.
It was a mistake, boss, I said quickly. I messed up and they heard me coming. They got away, but I can still find them. My hatred for the man steadily rose. I felt the coolness of the steel blade hidden in my boot.
Ah, Sergey,
Lev said.
listen, I like you. I really do. But I can't have you thinking you can make these mistakes, as you call them. So, I have to do something, you know? To ensure no more future mistakes.
Lev nodded to Igor, and the mountain of a man pulled out a glimmering cigar trimmer.
Which finger?
Lev asked me.
Boss?
I asked with horror.
You shoot with your right hand, yeah?
Lev said.
We'll need to keep that intact. So which finger from your left hand? I'm a reasonable man. I'm letting you choose.
I began to sweat. My finger, I thought frantically. He's going to cut off my finger. I could kill him now. Pull out the knife? No. They would expect me to resist right now. It's not the right time. Not if I want to know where he's keeping her. Igor stepped behind me and slammed my head against the table, pinning me like a mouse. He used his elbow to pin down my left arm. I began to breathe heavily.
Fine,
Lev said.
Igor will choose.
I felt the metal ring slip over my middle finger. Before I could even think, the blade clamped down with a sickening wet sound. I screamed. It felt like my middle finger had been replaced with fire. Igor released me, and I clasped my left hand with my right. Blood spurted from the wound in rhythm with my heartbeat. Lev picked up the severed finger.
See?
He said.
That wasn't so bad. I let you off easy, Sergey, because I like you.
I quelled my screams and clenched my hand tighter.
You don't believe me,
Lev said.
Come with me. Let me show you how easy I let you off.
Igor grabbed me by the shoulder and lifted me to my feet. He pushed me through another door in the room. It led to the large storage house behind the club. The storage house I had counted on to escape through. But when I saw what was inside, I choked on a scream. A man was tied spread eagle to a pile of wooden crates, a face of horror frozen on his pale face. He was naked, and there was a gash that led from his chest down to his groin. His intestines were hanging out of him like nightmarish confetti. Blood pooled on the floor beneath him, and organs I didn't dare identify were scattered in the blood. The man's name had been Arman. I had worked with him on some drug deals a few months back. I didn't like him much, but no one deserved this. Except maybe Lev.
See?
Lev said.
Easy, just a finger. Arman, though, I didn't like. All he cared about was money, which made him untrustworthy. But you, Sergey, you care about something else. Someone else. So I know you won't make any more mistakes, unless you want to see your daughter in the same position as poor Arman.
I had to act quickly. I had to pull courage from somewhere, surprise them while they thought I was still in shock, and I had to take out Igor first. I only had one chance, or he would crush my skull like an egg. Lev turned for a moment and smiled at the bloody corpse. I thought only of my daughter, my sweet Katya. I pulled the long, thin blade from my boot and lunged at Igor. He didn't move as I plunged the blade through his right eye, deep into his skull. The eyeball was tougher than I expected, and I felt sick. It was like sticking a knife through a thick cut of meat. Igor let out a grunt, blood pouring from his eye socket. He stumbled back. I didn't wait to watch him hit the ground. I turned to Lev, who was reaching for his gun.
You bastard!
He shouted. Just as he raised his pistol to me, I tackled him to the ground. Together, we fell into the sloppy mess of blood and guts on the floor. He reached for my face, and I gave him a sharp jab that shattered his nose and left him disoriented. Where is she? I demanded. He laughed and spat blood in my face. The anger in me was untamable. At last, I was confronting the lion who had toyed with me for so long, but I had no weapon to threaten him with. His gun had slid far out of reach. I looked at the bloody mess around us. I forced Katya into the forefront of my mind. I reached for the tangled slop of Arman's intestines. Grabbing a thick rope of his innards, I positioned myself behind Lev and pulled the intestines tight around his throat. He began to choke. I wrapped a second layer of intestine around his neck, fearing the first might tear. As I pulled tighter, Watery blood spilled from the intestines as if I were wringing out a wet rag.
Moscow!
Lev wheezed. I loosened my grip slowly.
Your daughter
He continued frantically.
is in Moscow, in my safe house, near Red Square.
He must have thought I would let him go. Maybe a better man would have, but I had already come this far. I pulled the flesh ropes tight again and watched his face grow red. Horrible, guttural noises escaped him. The blood from his nose poured faster as pressure built in his face. His veins looked ready to burst. Then he went limp. I released my grip and lay back in the sticky blood, suddenly aware of a smell like pennies. I no longer felt any pain from my missing finger. As I sat in the horrifying filth, I began to cry. But at least my daughter would finally be free. The warehouse sits in the middle of the old industrial district, an ugly block of concrete. It sprawls across the land, casting its weary gaze out onto its dilapidated surroundings. There was a time when it was the shining jewel of this town. A time when it would bustle with the optimistic energy of the workers who lived identical lives in identical houses just over the hill. When large boxes of electronics would pass through it on their way to different corners of the country, and sometimes even across the sea. But all that is ancient history, of course. For now, it is nothing but an eyesore battered with age. A sad and decrepit reminder of this town's once great potential. Wind whistles through its shattered windows like the mournful howl of an abandoned dog. Weeds and ivy crawl up its sides as if trying to make it sink into the ground, while a chain of grimy, flickering tube lights adorning its crumbling boundary wall desperately try to sweep aside the gloom that has settled into its very bones. Definitely not a place a fledgling like me would choose to spend his Friday night at. But sometimes things are so far beyond our control that we can do nothing but be swept by the tides of causality. As I climb out of my car, I adjust the buttons of my suit and let my eyes drift over the warehouse. Not because it holds my interest in any way, but because I would rather look at anything but at the man. No, the creature standing outside the rusted front gate. I fix my gaze on the walls. I focus on the paint that peels off them, making the building look like a dying snake trying to shed its skin one last time. I imagine myself wriggling into the cracks of the warehouse, hiding until all the shit that's about to go down tonight is over. But I know I will not be afforded that luxury. Already I can feel the man growing restless. Immense pressure emanates from his body, presses up against me like a knife scraping against the very bone of my throat. I sigh, shake my head, and begin walking towards him. The air grows colder and thicker the closer I get to him. Gently swirls around him, shimmering like a soft white mist under the dull streetlight. I loosen my tie to try and make it easier to breathe. It doesn't work. I really should have drank more blood before coming here. You are late, the man remarks, his silky voice gliding effortlessly out of his mouth. Apologies, Your Excellency, I reply, my head bowed. The preparations took a little longer than expected. I risk a glance at him. He's staring at me, ageless, poreless skin stretched across a youthful face studded with ancient eyes. Large, gold-rimmed black pupils like twin solar eclipses. I feel a shudder run through me. Let's dispense with the formalities, shall we? Call me Julius. I may be young, but I wasn't a total novice at the dance. I knew a trap when I saw one. I couldn't possibly do that, sire. He smirks, his fangs glinting silver under the pale light. It would be so easy for him to rip my throat out. You're a quick learner, aren't you? I can see why Jacob thinks so highly of you. I say nothing. I just give a reverent nod in response. Pity he couldn't be here. The king requested my master's presence at the royal lodge, sire. Ah, yes, of course. When his most venerable majesty calls, you sure damn well answer. A lesson Michael here seems to have forgotten. He reaches into the jacket of his sleek gray suit, pulls out a cigar from a small metal case, and jams it between his teeth. So, are your men ready? They are at your command, I reply as I give him a light. Praetorians, all of them. Finest troops on the East Coast. But of course he knows that. Who, how many, where? An elder like him would have known the answers to those questions the minute those soldiers stepped foot inside the town. I wish I could sense them as well. My inability to do so reminds me of my own weakness. Makes me feel uneasy, exposed. Elder Julius takes a long drag from his cigar. I'm impressed you managed to convince the Prime Council to hand over the Praetorians. I gave him a humble smile. It was all Master Jacob's doing. It was he who convinced them that it was necessary to bring this war to an end. And of course, a phone call from the Royal Lodge sealed the deal. The powerful vampire shakes his head with a chuckle. All that for lil old Michael. Overkill if you ask me. That little cockroach doesn't deserve all the attention. The eponymous cockroach here, of course, is the little brother of the vampire king of this great nation, and also the 7th most powerful blood-sucking creature on the continent. I curse him under my breath, yet again, for setting up his base on what has just recently become our turf, forcing us to participate in this civil war. Elder Julius sniffs the air, like a bloodhound. I can smell them in there, Michael and his men. It's faint, but it's there. The stale stench of fear, like rust on an old metal pipe. He smiles, bares his fangs. Oh, how I've looked forward to this night. I've finally caught you, you slippery little bastard. My throat feels like sandpaper. The very thought of standing in the same room as these monsters sets my nerves on edge. But to go to war with them? I can feel the beast within me lashing out, trying to rip my sanity to shreds for daring to go along with this foolishness. I grit my teeth and steady myself. All right, let's get started, shall we? Elder Julius says as he tosses his mostly intact cigar aside. It bounces off the asphalt, sends sparks flying into the air. The old vampire proceeds to untie his ponytail, his long silver hair spilling across his shoulders like a lion's mane. He then closes his eyes, cracks his knuckles, and unleashes himself. Terror ripples through me as I'm hit with the full extent of his power. It feels like my head is being crushed in a vice while I'm drowning in acid. My brain pounds in my skull, my lungs burn, my knees wobble. Heat sears every pore in my skin. It takes everything I have just to keep standing. Dear God, just how powerful is he? And then, just as quickly as it had started, the insane pressure is gone. The power that burned hot enough to scorch my soul itself is once again ensconced within Elder Julius's body. I lean against the wall, trying to catch my breath. You all right there? He asks, amused, twirling a small knife in his hands. I cough. You certainly know how to make an entrance, sire. He glides over to the wall, eases himself against it, and waits for the chaos to start. That little display of power is intended to hit 2 birds with a single stone, to throw Michael and his men into complete disarray, and to signal to the Praetorians to take advantage of the resultant confusion and begin their assault. Cold air licks at the back of my neck as I strain my ears for any signs that the enemy has taken notice of Elder Julius's performance. Frantic pattering of booted feet, angry, panicked whispers, metallic clicks of guns being loaded. But there's nothing. The warehouse is shrouded in a nervous silence. Something's wrong, I say, my tense shoulders turning in knots. He doesn't say anything. Did they know that he was here? Is that why they haven't broken the silence? Couldn't be. I'm sure they must have sensed my presence when I arrived here. I'm too young, too weak to fully meld with the shadows. But Elder Julius? No. You only see him if he lets you. Something is terribly wrong here. Muttering something under his breath, Elder Julius whips his knife in the air and begins marching towards the front door of the warehouse. I pull my Glock out of its holster and start to follow. I spot the Praetorians as soon as we turn the corner and walk through the gate. They have fanned out, surrounded the warehouse from all sides, guns aimed at the numerous shattered windows that dot its walls. 2 of them break off and begin jogging towards us, their boots clicking on the cracked and overgrown asphalt. Elder Julius stops as they approach, lower their rifles, and greet him with a bow. Sire, the one on the right says, fangs and blood-red lips peeking through the balaclava. We've taken a look inside. It's strange. Explain, he demands. They exchange a look. It's best if you see for yourself. He nods and they draw their guns up and begin leading us towards the broad front door of the warehouse. Faded white paint, rusted hinges that creak with the cold wind. The door is on its last legs, and the Praetorian puts it out of its misery by kicking it down, sending it slamming onto the ground with a resounding boom. The Praetorians switch on the flashlights mounted on their guns, swing it around the dark interior of the warehouse, and we see why none of our enemies had reacted earlier. Because they're all dead. The warehouse had been turned into a fortress. Sandbagged defenses, machine guns mounted at key positions. They had a death trap waiting for us. But the only carnage that greets us is one that seems to have taken place hours ago. I I see walls and floor splattered with dried, corrupted blood, corpses slumped against sandbags and machine guns, sometimes whole, often in unrecognizable pieces. Shriveled up innards litter the dusty floor and hang from broken light fixtures like bunting. And the smell, dear God, the smell. Vile stench of vampire gore and refuse stabs at my brain through my nostrils. And something else, old rot, like things decaying under a hot desert sun. I clamp my hand on my mouth to stop myself from retching. Seems like Michael's group had a bit of a falling out. The Praetorian who led us here remarks. That's not what this is, Elder Julius replies, his voice now muted, serious. The boisterousness in his demeanor is completely gone. I force my pupils to dilate and stare at him. The worry that creases his forehead is more terrifying than the macabre sight in front of me. I feel saliva drying up in my mouth. Is something wrong, sire? The Praetorian asks. Yeah, the smell. It's strong here, overpowers the senses, but it's far too faint outside. I had to concentrate just to get a slight whiff. He takes a pause, almost as if the stench is being suppressed, contained within these walls. Cold shivers rack my spine. He turns to look at me. You had people watching this place, did you not? I nod. Yes, sire. 2 men positioned on the hill overlooking this warehouse, around the clock. And I'm assuming they didn't hear our friends here being torn apart. I shake my head. What could be powerful enough to hide something like this? Just the thought makes my head swim. Intriguing. He places a foot on a mutilated corpse lying face down on the ground, kicks it onto its side. And there's the matter of the bite marks on these bodies. I narrow my eyes as they wander over the corpse, but my vision isn't strong enough to make out the wounds. Thankfully, the white glow of a flashlight passes over it, revealing the injuries. Small bites, single puncture wounds, Elder Julius says, all over the body, like he was bitten by some sort of a critter. What do you think happened here? I whisper in disbelief. That's exactly what I intend to find out, he replies, before jabbing his thumb at the Praetorian. Get your men inside, search all the bodies, find Michael. I'm going to find out what happened here, even if I have to drag that bastard right out of hell. The rest of the Praetorians swiftly pour into the warehouse, their flashlights bobbing and weaving across every inch of the structure. The very air inside brims with power oozing out of the powerful vampires. But there's an undercurrent of something else in here, a faint presence of something long gone that still lingers in the air. Even I can sense it, a trace of immense power that makes everyone inside uncomfortable and fearful. The Praetorians, clad in black body armor, sift through the tattered remains splattered everywhere. Some faces are too brutally smashed to be recognized, and for that, they rely on Elder Julius and the Praetorians who've interacted with Michael in the past and are familiar with the stench of his blood. We don't find Michael, and Elder Julius begins to grow restless until we do find something tucked away in a damp and dark corner of the warehouse, behind a sandbag wall, beneath about a dozen bloody and broken limbs. There's a trap door here! We rush towards the voice, wading through the bloody muck on the floor to find 2 soldiers hunched over the dusty, grimy trap door. It's large, about the length of a man. I didn't know this place even had a basement, I say. Yeah? Maybe this is why old Michael chose this place, Elder Julius says. Open it. There's a shrieking groan as the 2 Praetorians force the hatch open, revealing a steep flight of stone stairs that leads into the darkness below. Elder Julius bends over, squints, and then frowns. Give me a flashlight, he says, and for a moment there's a pause. All of us around him are taken aback, for there is no reason a creature as old as him would need a light to see in the dark. A natural darkness, that is. He grabs a flashlight from one of the soldiers and begins descending down the stairs. I follow, and so do 2 of the Praetorians. The steps are too small, and I'm afraid of tripping and crashing into the Elder, sending us both hurtling downstairs. What would he do if that happened, I wonder? Cut my head off midair, simply for my stupidity? It's damp down here. Smells of wet clothes forgotten in dark, unheated rooms, or water leaking from cracked pipes and rotting in the walls. And there's another scent, somewhat masked by the former, yet not quite blending in. It reeks like moist ashes of a dead fire. I crinkle my nose and keep moving downwards. The stairs drops us off at a small landing, hemmed in by the walls. A sleek wooden door is set into the wall directly in front of us. Faint yellow light seeps out from the gap beneath the door, suggesting that the room beyond might be illuminated. Elder Julius steps forward, places his hand on the gilded doorknob, turns it, and pushes the door open. My mouth drops at the sight beyond the door. The room is cramped, with a mud roof that hangs so low I have to bend my neck just to stand here. Dozens of shadows dance across the room as candles, at various stages of their life, burn from their perches on earthen flooring, on shelves carved into the mud walls, and most importantly, on the altar placed next to the far wall, bathing the tiny space in a dull, shimmering yellow glow. And slumped against the small table that serves as the altar rests the corpse of our quarry, Michael. His jaw has been ripped clean off. His tongue hangs limply on his neck. Even his eyes have been gouged out. Blood from his wounds has drenched his white dress shirt, turning it dark red. I have never seen such terrifying violence. Who would inflict such hatred on someone else and be powerful enough to inflict it on a vampire like Michael? "Oh, Michael," Elder Julius whispers. "You reckless fool. What the have you done?" I sense pure, unadulterated terror in the Elder's voice, and that terror gets magnified in my heart. My eyes get drawn once again to the altar. In the middle of it sits an 8-pointed star made of some strange black metal that I don't recognize. It is ringed by half a dozen tiny, underdeveloped skulls like those of aborted fetuses. Their white bones have been splashed with blood, human blood. He opened a door that should not have been opened. My heart skips a beat as the strange feminine whisper drifts through the stale, smoky air in the room, reverberates through the walls. It echoes in my bones, makes me feel violated, like a wet tongue forcibly thrust down my ear. Those of us in the room whirl around frantically, weapons waving in the air, trying to locate the source of that voice. It sounded like it had been spoken by someone standing with us, but of course that voice was totally alien. My sanity begins to fray. The voice once again fills the air, but this time it's even lower and completely incomprehensible. But I can feel the power in it, makes my bones rattle, shakes the blood in my insides. And then another sound joins in. Squeaks. At first it's barely audible, like a fly buzzing in my ear. But it continues to get louder and louder, till it becomes deafening, starts to scrape at my very eardrums. "What the is that?" one of the Praetorians shouts. "Stand back to back!" Elder Julius screams. No one listens. For the next second, something digs through the ground beneath us. The dirt in the center of the room is pushed aside. A small hole is opened up, and a mass of brown fur pours out of it. Rats. Hundreds of them start to swarm us, all squeaky with glowing red eyes and serrated smiles. The flood of moving fur and flesh crashes into us, biting, gnawing, picking the flesh from our bones. We try to fight back, but it's useless. I get 2 shots off before the pain from the bites makes me drop the gun, and I stumble backwards. Little rat paws scratching my flesh. They crawl up inside of my thighs, and all I can do is scream. The Praetorians don't fare any better. Even Elder Julius, old and powerful as he is, meets an inglorious end at the hands and claws and teeth of the rats. He waves his knife around, slicing dozens of them into pieces with each swing, smashes apart hundreds of them with his telekinetic powers. But thousands instantly replace them, tumbling and trampling over another. They wriggle out of holes in dark, unseen corners and blanket the room, a moving carpet of brown fur that snuffs out all traces of light. It isn't long before the pain numbs my mind, knocks me unconscious. Pain. It's the last thing I felt before fading away. It is the first thing that greets me when I wake up. It feels like my entire body is on fire. Every muscle, however many the rats left behind, throbs and aches. I would scream if I had any strength left to do so. I'm lying face down on the ground. Where? I can't tell. It hurts too much to move my head, but my cheek feels wet. Blood. Slowly and very carefully, I sniff it. It's not my own. Not even human. It's clotted and has a vile, corrupt stench to it, but it's blood nonetheless. My tongue darts out of my mouth, takes a quick lick. It's utterly disgusting, yet in my weakened state, feels heavenly. I move my head, bite my cheek to fight through the pain that explodes in my skull, and to begin lapping at the pool of clotted blood on the dusty ground beneath my head. Strength begins to seep into my body once again. Oh, looks like you're finally awake. My body trembles in surprise. It's that voice again, the one that unleashed the nightmare on us. I crane my neck and look up, and see a naked woman staring down at me. She's holding a rat in her hand, a long and sharp fingernail digging into its throat. "Need more?" she asks, amused, and slices the rat's neck open before I can answer. I hungrily drink the blood that streams down on my face, grateful for the sustenance. I can feel some of my wounds stitching themselves back up. The woman reaches down towards me, lifts me up by the arm, and helps me sit up against something cool and smooth. I cough and notice it's the door of a car. My car. How are you feeling, child? I look up again and notice the blazing scenery behind her. It's the warehouse. It's on fire. Dazzling orange flames burst out of the windows, crackling and licking the air. What? I croak. What happened? To your friends? She asks. I killed them all, just like the ones who summoned me. I stare at her. She has no presence, unlike Elder Julius, who would make your heart tremble by just standing next to you. This woman feels like nothing, like a dark, empty void. It makes my soul shiver. What? What are you? I ask, terrified. A friend, if you would let me be one, she answers, smiling. It doesn't reach her eyes. Oh God, those eyes. Large yellow irises and narrow black slits for pupils, like a cat. You can call me Inanna. Please, I beg. For what? My life, I think. Let me go. I'm afraid I can't quite do that. My heart sinks. Why? What do you want from me? She caresses my cheek with her hand, looks at me with pity. I'm going to make this world burn, child. And you're going to help me, are you not? My mouth begins to move on its own. Yes, mistress. Of course I am. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.